The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the Johnson family's living room as Sophia Johnson folded the last of her husband's shirts into his carry-on. The house buzzed with the energy of anticipation and last-minute preparations for their long-awaited vacation. Maya, the teenage daughter, darted through the hallway, her phone in hand, recording a video for her friends. "We're finally off to the Bahamas," she exclaimed, twirling in excitement. Jamal, her younger brother, rolled his eyes as he stuffed headphones into his backpack. "Nobody cares, Maya," he muttered, though the grin tugging at his lips betrayed his own excitement. Thomas Johnson entered the room, adjusting the cuffs of his casual shirt. Despite his usual corporate attire, today he looked like any other dad preparing for a family trip. Comfortable sneakers, a baseball cap, and a travel pillow slung over his shoulder. It was a rare sight for the senior airline executive, whose work had consumed much of his time lately. This vacation wasn't just a getaway. It was a celebration of Jamal's acceptance into college and a chance for the family to reconnect after months of hectic schedules. Sophia caught her husband's eye and gave him a warm smile. "I told you we'd get everything packed on time," she teased. "Now if only you'd trust me to handle the passports without triple-checking them." "I'm just being thorough," Thomas replied with a chuckle, patting his pocket where the travel documents were neatly stowed. He glanced at the clock. "We need to leave in 20 minutes. Everyone ready?" Jamal zipped his bag and slung it over his shoulder. Maya groaned. "Do we really need to be at the airport so early? I mean, Dad works for the airline. Shouldn't we get some perks?" she asked, her tone half-joking. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but firm. "Being on time is a perk, Maya. Let's not push our luck." As they piled into the car, the mood was light and full of promise. Thomas drove, humming along to the playlist Sophia had queued up, while Maya and Jamal bickered over which snacks they should have brought. The chatter filled the air, a comforting reminder of their tight-knit bond. At a red light, Thomas glanced at the rearview mirror, watching his kids laugh. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "there's always going to be situations where people test your patience. But how you respond, that's what matters." Sophia reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's why you're the rock of this family." Yeah. Dad's wisdom hour," Maya teased, earning a playful nudge from her brother. But deep down, they both knew their father's calm and steady nature was the anchor that held them all together. As they pulled into the airport parking lot, the excitement in the car reached a crescendo. The Johnsons had no idea what lay ahead for them, but in that moment, they were just a family embarking on an adventure, their hearts light and full of hope. The Johnsons stepped into the bustling airport terminal, the excitement of their vacation coursing through them. The smell of fresh coffee and the murmur of announcements filled the air as travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases in tow. Thomas led the way, his calm, composed demeanor setting the tone, while Maya trailed behind, snapping candid photos for her social media. At the check-in counter, the family presented their documents to the airline agent. The agent, a young man with a forced smile, glanced at their tickets and then at the computer screen. His expression shifted slightly, just enough to be noticeable. He muttered, typing something into the system. The pause stretched longer than it should have. "Is everything all right?" Sophia asked, her tone polite but tinged with concern. The agent avoided eye contact, clicking rapidly. "It seems there's been a change to your reservation," he finally said. "Your seats have been reassigned." Thomas frowned. "Reassigned? We booked these tickets months ago. There shouldn't be any changes." The agent glanced at the family, his expression inscrutable, and then back at the screen. "I'll need to check with my supervisor. Please step aside for a moment." A wave of unease rippled through the Johnsons as they moved to the side. Other travelers were checked in without incident, their boarding passes handed over with cheerful efficiency. The family waited, their anticipation beginning to sour. Maya crossed her arms and scrolled through her phone, muttering under her breath. After what felt like an eternity, The agent returned with a woman who introduced herself as the supervisor. Her demeanor was brisk, bordering on dismissive. Unfortunately, she began, your seats were double booked and we had to reassign them. We're doing our best to accommodate you on a later flight. Thomas's jaw tightened. He remained calm but firm. Double booked? We purchased these tickets months ago and confirmed them last week. How does this happen? The supervisor's response was curt. It's not uncommon. I assure you we're following protocol. Sophia intervened, her voice steady. Protocol or not, this doesn't feel right. We've done everything by the book. Other passengers began to notice the commotion, some pausing to watch. Maya, fed up, took out her phone and began recording. This is ridiculous, she said quietly, addressing the camera. My family saved for this vacation, and now we're being told we can't board our flight. Why? Because someone else was more important. Maya, Thomas said gently, put the phone down, but it was too late. She'd already hit post. The supervisor sighed, clearly eager to end the interaction. You can speak with customer service. They might be able to find another flight for you. Jamal, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. But why us? Why did our seats get taken? The supervisor didn't answer, simply gesturing toward the customer service desk. It was an action so dismissive it felt deliberate, and something in the pit of Thomas's stomach tightened. He exchanged a glance with Sophia, who nodded slightly. This wasn't just a mistake. Something deeper was at play. As the family moved toward the customer service desk, Thomas discreetly took out his phone and began jotting down notes. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but years of experience had taught him to recognize patterns, and this one was all too familiar. Nearby, Maya checked her phone and gasped. Dad, she whispered, holding up the screen. Her post was already gaining traction, with hundreds of likes and comments pouring in. Strangers expressed outrage, calling out what they perceived as discriminatory treatment. People are on our side, she said, her tone both surprised and vindicated. Thomas glanced at the screen but didn't react. Instead, he calmly approached the customer service representative, who looked flustered as they tried to handle the growing line of complaints. Excuse me, Thomas said, his voice steady. I need to speak with someone in charge. Now, the representative hesitated, then nodded. I'll see what I can do. Minutes later, a manager appeared, his expression a mix of irritation and worry. How can I help you? He asked. Thomas introduced himself and explained the situation. He chose his words carefully, ensuring he conveyed his frustration without losing composure. This experience doesn't reflect the values your airline claims to uphold, he concluded. The manager's face paled as Thomas handed over his business card, revealing his position as a senior airline executive. I expected better from this company, Thomas added, his tone sharp but measured. The manager stammered out an apology, promising to look into the matter. Meanwhile, the commotion around the Johnsons continued to grow, fueled by Maya's viral post. Strangers began approaching, some offering support, others demanding answers from the staff. The tension in the air was palpable. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on Thomas's arm. You did the right thing, she said softly. He nodded but remained focused. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about something much larger, and he knew the next steps would be critical. The Johnsons stood off to the side of the gate, frustration simmering beneath their composed exteriors. Other passengers continued to board the flight without issue, their tickets scanned efficiently by the very agent who had dismissed the family moments earlier. Thomas's mind raced as he observed the scene, analyzing every detail. Years of navigating corporate bureaucracy had taught him that silence in moments like this often spoke louder than words. Maya, however, was far less interested in silence. Her phone buzzed incessantly as notifications flooded in. Dad, she said, glancing up, my post is blowing up. People are already tagging the airline, calling them out for what's happening to us. Thomas gave her a pointed look but softened his tone. Maya, I need you to stay calm. This isn't a game. It's a real issue, and we're going to handle it the right way. Maya sighed but nodded. Fine, but people should know. This isn't okay. Thomas shifted his focus back to his phone, his fingers flying over the screen as he sent a quick message to his assistant, Sharon. She was his trusted right hand at corporate headquarters, and if anyone could cut through red tape quickly, it was her. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. Sharon's reply was brief but effective. Understood. Escalating to the CEO immediately. Sit tight. Thomas slipped his phone into his pocket, his expression calm but purposeful. Sophia noticed and touched his arm lightly. You called, Sharon? She asked in a low voice. I did, he replied. This won't be swept under the rug, but I want to give them the chance to do the right thing first. Meanwhile, the gate agent, who had studiously avoided looking in their direction, leaned toward the supervisor. They exchanged hushed words, glancing back at the Johnsons periodically. It was clear the growing attention, both at the gate and online, was beginning to rattle them. Excuse me, Thomas said, approaching the supervisor again. His tone was firm but polite. Have you managed to find a resolution? The supervisor stiffened, her professionalism faltering under the weight of the situation. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing our best to rebook you on a later flight, she said, her voice lacking conviction. Before Thomas could respond, the tension in the air shifted. A man in a sharp suit emerged from the corridor, his polished appearance and hurried pace signaling authority. He introduced himself as David, the airline's regional manager. His expression was strained but polite as he approached the Johnsons. Mr. Johnson, I understand there's been an issue, David began, extending his hand. Thomas shook it but didn't smile. That's one way to put it, Thomas replied. My family and I have been displaced from our flight without a clear explanation. Your team's response has been dismissive at best and discriminatory at worst. David paled slightly, glancing toward the gate agent and supervisor. I assure you, we take these matters seriously, he said quickly. Let me see what I can do to rectify this. As David pulled the supervisor aside for a hushed conversation, Maya leaned toward her mother. Do you think he knows who Dad is? Sophia gave a slight shrug but didn't answer. Thomas remained silent, observing the unfolding scene with practiced patience. The truth became evident moments later when David returned. His demeanor noticeably changed. Mr. Johnson, he said, his voice now tinged with nervousness, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Thomas raised an eyebrow but nodded. He gestured toward Sophia. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my family. David hesitated, then took a deep breath. I've been made aware of your position with the company. Please allow me to extend my deepest apologies for this misunderstanding. This is not how we want any of our passengers, especially someone of your standing, to be treated. The gate agent and supervisor froze, their faces a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Maya stifled a smirk, but Thomas remained composed. My standing, he repeated, his voice even. Does that mean this treatment would have been acceptable if I were anyone else? David faltered. No, of course not. I only meant, Thomas held up a hand, cutting him off. I don't need preferential treatment because of my role. What I need is for your team to treat every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are. David nodded quickly. Absolutely, sir. I'll personally ensure your family is accommodated immediately, and we'll begin an internal review of this incident. Good, Thomas replied, his tone sharp but measured. Because what happened here today isn't just about my family. It's about the culture of your team. And as a senior executive, I'm holding all of us accountable for that. By now, other passengers had caught wind of the unfolding drama. Some murmured in support of the Johnsons, while others watched curiously. The supervisor and gate agent avoided eye contact, their earlier confidence replaced by visible unease. Thomas turned back to his family, his expression softening. Let's see if they can get us on this flight, he said quietly. Sophia nodded, her pride in him evident. As the Johnsons finally began boarding, Maya whispered to Jamal, "Dad's like a Jedi, calm, composed, but unstoppable." Jamal chuckled. "Yeah, but now the internet's watching too. They better fix this fast." Behind them, the airline staff scrambled, the weight of their actions and the growing public attention pressing down on them. The Johnson family settled into seats in the airport lounge, their initial excitement for the trip now overshadowed by frustration and exhaustion. Thomas sat with his phone in hand, quietly navigating the storm brewing online. Maya's post, which had started as an impulsive expression of indignation, had taken on a life of its own. The airline's official account had already been tagged thousands of times, with users demanding answers and justice. Sophia leaned over. "Sharon called back, didn't she?" she asked softly. Thomas nodded. "The CO is on his way," he said matter-of-factly, though his calm voice carried an undercurrent of determination. This situation just became a lot bigger than us. Not long after, a man in his late 40s approached, flanked by two assistants. His tailored suit and purposeful stride identified him instantly. Jonathan Hale, the airline CEO, was known for his charisma and hands-on approach, but in this moment, he looked uncharacteristically unsettled. "Thomas," Hale said, extending his hand. "I came as soon as I heard. I'm deeply sorry for what's happened here." Thomas stood, shaking Hale's hand firmly, but without the warmth their interactions usually carried. "Jonathan," he replied evenly, "I appreciate you coming in person. I assume you've been briefed." Hale nodded, glancing at Sophia and the children. "I have, and let me first apologize to you all on behalf of the company. This is unacceptable. It shouldn't have happened, not to you, not to anyone." Maya crossed her arms, skeptical. "If it shouldn't happen to anyone, why does it keep happening?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Sophia gave her a warning look, but Thomas raised a hand, signaling that it was okay. "It's a fair question," Thomas said, turning back to Hale, "and one we can't dismiss with an apology." Hale sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "I've already spoken to the regional manager, and we're conducting an internal investigation. The staff involved will be held accountable." "Accountability is a good start," Thomas said, his voice calm but resolute. "But it's not enough. This incident isn't just about today. It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to persist." Hale nodded, visibly humbled. "I'm listening." Thomas took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "We need to do more than react to incidents like this. We need proactive measures, systemic changes. Diversity training isn't a one-off solution. It needs to be comprehensive, ongoing, and tied to measurable outcomes. We need a task force to review hiring practices, promotion policies, and complaints about bias." Hale listened intently, his assistant scribbling notes furiously. "You're right," he said finally, "and I want you to lead this initiative. No one else is better suited to make these changes." Thomas's expression didn't change. "I'll help, but not as a figurehead. This can't just be a PR move. I'll need your full backing and a commitment to transparency." "You have it," Hale said without hesitation. "I mean it. This is a wake-up call for all of us." Thomas nodded, satisfied for now, and gestured toward his family. "And what about this flight? My family deserves more than empty promises today." Hale turned to one of his assistants, who quickly stepped forward. "We've arranged for your family to board the next available flight in first class. Everything has been handled." Sophia, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Thank you," she said, her tone measured. "But this isn't just about getting on a flight. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this." Hale nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mrs. Johnson. We'll make this right." As the Johnsons were escorted back to the gate, the atmosphere had shifted. The once dismissive staff now moved with urgency, their earlier condescension replaced by nervous efficiency. The gate agent avoided their gaze entirely, while the supervisor offered a strained smile. though she knew better than to say anything. Before boarding, Thomas turned back to Hale, who had remained at the gate. "Jonathan," he said, "this is a defining moment for the company. Don't waste it." Hale extended his hand again, this time with sincerity. "We won't," he promised. As the Johnsons boarded the plane, Maya leaned toward her father. "Do you think he'll really follow through?" she asked. Thomas considered the question for a moment. "We'll make sure he does," he replied, his tone steady. The family settled into their seats, the tension slowly ebbing as the plane prepared for takeoff. Jamal leaned back, headphones in, while Sophia pulled out a book. Maya, ever the documentarian, snapped a discreet photo of the cabin, captioning it, "Justice takes flight." For the first time that day, Thomas allowed himself a small smile. The fight wasn't over, but they'd taken an important first step. The Johnsons' flight soared into the sky, but the weight of the day's events still lingered. Although they were now seated comfortably in first class, it wasn't the luxurious seats or the extra space that brought them comfort. It was a knowledge that their ordeal had sparked something bigger. Maya scrolled through her phone, watching as her initial post continued to spread like wildfire. Comments and shares had ballooned into tens of thousands, with strangers rallying behind their story. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination at airports, while others demanded answers directly from the airline. News outlets had already picked up the story, turning the Johnson family into an unexpected symbol of resilience and accountability. "Dad, you've got to see this," Maya said, handing her phone to Thomas. He glanced at the screen, his expression thoughtful. "Looks like people are paying attention," she added, a note of pride in her voice. Thomas nodded, handing the phone back. "It's a start, Maya, but attention is only part of the solution. Real change comes from what we do next." Sophia leaned over, her voice quiet yet firm. "And you made sure they know that. The CEO wouldn't have come all the way here if he didn't understand how serious this is." Jamal, who had been listening silently, finally spoke up. "Do you think they'll actually change, though? Or are they just saying it to save face?" Thomas paused, his gaze steady. "That depends on us. Change doesn't happen because it's easy or convenient. It happens because people hold others accountable. We've put the spotlight on them. Now they'll have to act, or the world will see their failure." Sophia gave him a small smile, her hand resting on his arm. "You always know how to see the bigger picture." As the plane began its descent, Thomas found himself reflecting on the events of the day. The experience had tested his patience, but it had also reaffirmed his belief in the importance of using his position to advocate for change. For too long, he had worked quietly behind the scenes, pushing for better practices within the company. Now, the moment had come to take those efforts public. When they landed, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. Several reporters waiting near the terminal. Maya's viral post had turned their story into national news. The family navigated the crowd carefully, with Thomas offering brief but measured remarks. Today's events were about more than my family. They were about accountability and the need for systemic change. The airline has assured us they'll take steps to address these issues, and I intend to hold them to that promise. The reporters pressed for more, but Thomas declined to elaborate. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a vacation to enjoy," he said with a polite smile, guiding his family past the cameras. Later that evening, as the Johnsons settled into their beachfront resort, the tension began to lift. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop as they unpacked and prepared to relax. Maya updated her post, adding a note about the reforms her father had proposed and the CEO's commitment to making them happen. "Look," she said, showing her family the updated post. "People are already calling it Wings of Justice. You think it'll stick?" Thomas chuckled softly. "Let's hope it does. But it's not the name that matters. It's the results." As the family gathered on the balcony to watch the sunset, the weight of the day finally began to fade. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his family around him and the steady rhythm of the ocean below. They had faced adversity, and while the journey ahead would be challenging, they had taken the first step toward making a difference, not just for themselves, but for others as well. The setting sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and orange as the Johnson family sat on the balcony of their beachfront resort, a quiet moment of peace finally settling over them. Maya stretched her legs out on the lounger, her phone resting beside her for the first time in hours. Jamal leaned back with a book he had brought but hadn't touched until now. The distant sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence, soothing and rhythmic. Thomas leaned on the railing, gazing at the ocean. Sophia joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We made it," she said softly. Thomas nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did. And maybe, just maybe, we helped make things better for others, too." Behind them, Maya was typing on her phone again, her expression more thoughtful than before. "I updated the post," she said, breaking the quiet. "I told everyone about what you proposed to the CEO. People are calling it a turning point for the airline." Sophia smiled, glancing at her daughter. "A turning point. That has a nice ring to it." Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's just hope they follow through." Maya looked up, her eyes sparkling. "They will, Dad, because now the world is watching." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family shared a moment of laughter, their bond unshaken and stronger than ever. Their fight wasn't over, but tonight there was hope, a sense that their journey had meaning beyond themselves. The waves whispered a quiet promise. Change was in motion, and the Johnsons had given it wings.